Emily couldn't contain her smile as she gazed at herself in the mirror, dressed in her wedding gown. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Ever since she was a little girl, she had dreamed of this moment. The white dress, the church filled with flowers, and the man of her dreams waiting at the altar. All her friends and family were gathered, eager to witness the union. The atmosphere was one of pure celebration, and Emily's heart raced with anticipation. But as the minutes ticked by, something began to shift. The once animated whispers among the guests were now filled with uncertainty. Her father, who had stood proudly by her side, started fidgeting with his watch, only adding to her anxiety. "Where's Mike?" Emily thought as she glanced toward the church doors. Each passing second seemed to drag, as if time itself was slowing down to prolong her torment. Tension began to build, and soon her maid of honor approached with a nervous smile, trying to soothe the bride. "I'm sure he's stuck in traffic," she said, but her voice trembled, betraying her own insecurity. The minutes crept by, and soon 20-30 minutes had passed. The once joyous mood was now clouded by a sense of dread. The pastor, looking increasingly uncomfortable, gently approached Emily. "Perhaps we should give it a few more minutes," he suggested. But Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She knew something was terribly wrong. Each heartbeat seemed heavier, and her hands began to shake. "He's not coming," whispered a voice in her head, a voice she desperately tried to push away. "He wouldn't do this to me, not like this." But time kept passing, and there was still no sign of Mike. The nervous glances on the faces of the guests began to shift into pity, the kind of pity Emily never imagined anyone would feel for her. Then, suddenly, the silence was pierced by the sound of a cell phone notification. Her brother, seated in the front row, checked his phone, and his face immediately turned pale. He looked at Emily with a mix of hesitation and sorrow. "Emily, it's a message from Mike," he said, approaching slowly. She already knew, even before he spoke, but hearing the words felt like a punch to the gut. He's not coming." For a moment, the world stopped. Emily could hear nothing but the sound of her own rapid heartbeat, pounding so hard it seemed to echo through the hall, now devoid of hope. She had been abandoned. At the altar, in front of everyone she knew and loved, Mike had left her. With no word, no explanation, just a short, cold message. The sight of the white dress, which just minutes ago made her feel like a princess, now suffocated her. The reception hall, decorated with flowers and twinkling lights, felt like a prison where every gaze upon her was filled with pity. The cameras that were meant to capture moments of joy had now become witnesses to her nightmare. Each click seemed to document her humiliation. The smile that had once graced her face was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness. How could she move on? How could she pick herself up after being so publicly rejected and humiliated? These questions flooded her mind as silent tears began to streak down her cheeks. The Emily who had stood there moments ago, ready to begin her life with the man she loved, was now completely lost. She wanted to scream, to vanish, to escape as quickly as possible, but her legs were too heavy to move. The days following the altar disaster were the hardest Emily had ever faced. She could barely get out of bed, and every time she closed her eyes, she relived the scene at the church, the pitiful looks, the searing pain of rejection. Every notification on her phone sent a wave of fear through her, dreading another message that would deepen her wounds. Her friends tried to help, sending messages of support and offering to keep her company. But nothing seemed capable of filling the emptiness Mike had left behind. "How could he do this to me?" she thought repeatedly. There was no explanation, no clue, just the cold silence and that short, heartless message. Weeks passed, and the pain still weighed like a crushing burden on her chest. But Emily knew she needed to get back to her life. Her job as a project manager at a marketing firm demanded her attention. After years of hard work, she couldn't afford to fail now. When she finally returned to the office, things weren't as she expected. Colleagues who usually greeted her with smiles now glanced at her with caution, unsure of how to approach her. The rumor of her abandonment at the altar had spread through the company. She could feel the weight of pitiful looks and hushed whispers behind closed doors. On her first day back, Emily walked into the conference room for an important presentation. She tried to keep her composure, but her heart raced and her hands were sweaty. As she began to speak, the words seemed to slip from her mind. Everything felt scrambled and her sentences lost coherence. One of her colleagues, Claire, leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay? Maybe you should take a few more days off." The comment, though well-meaning, only made Emily feel worse. "I'm fine." She forced a smile, but inside doubt was growing. She wasn't fine, and the pressure at work only made her feel more fragile. As the days went on, things continued to spiral. Emily made mistakes on reports she could usually complete with her eyes closed. Her boss started questioning her ability to lead, and Claire began taking on more responsibilities, feeding Emily's fear of being replaced. Then she stumbled upon something that shattered her even further. One morning, as she opened her Instagram, she saw a photo that left her breathless. Mike, her ex-fiancé, was in a new relationship. Just 1 month after what should have been their dream wedding, he was with another woman, smiling, happy, as if nothing had happened. How could he move on so fast? Emily wondered, feeling the ground fall out from under her again. Her heart tightened, and tears welled in her eyes. It felt like being abandoned a second time. The pain returned with full force, and the wounds that had barely begun to heal were ripped open again, deeper than before. Anger started to build inside her. Anger at Mike for moving on without looking back, and anger at herself for still being stuck in what had happened. But above all, there was a sense of betrayal, as if their entire relationship had been a lie. At work, the situation worsened. Her mistakes were starting to affect the company's results, and the trust her colleagues had in her was crumbling. Her boss, who used to praise her for her efficiency, began scheduling meetings to discuss her performance. "Emily, I know you're going through a tough time, but the company needs you at your best," he said during one closed-door meeting. "If things don't improve soon, we'll have to reconsider your position here." His words felt like a final blow. She felt like she was losing everything: the job she loved, the trust of her coworkers, and any hope that her life could return to normal. Each passing day, Emily felt like she was sinking deeper into a pit with no way out. There was no escaping the shadow of abandonment, humiliation, and loss. And now, the looming threat of losing her job seemed inevitable. At the end of a long, exhausting week, Emily collapsed onto her couch at home, staring at the ceiling. The tears came hard, unstoppable. For the first time, she began questioning everything. "I'm never going to be able to get past this," she thought. "I'm not the same person I was before. He's destroyed me." Emily no longer knew how to move forward. Each day felt heavier than the last. The humiliation of being abandoned at the altar still haunted her, and the image of Mike happily with another woman tore her apart from the inside. She had lost confidence at work, and the looming possibility of being fired seemed more real with each passing day. Everything felt out of control. One Friday afternoon, after another tense meeting with her boss, where he voiced his dissatisfaction with her performance, Emily reached her breaking point. She left the office hastily, without saying a word to anyone, and got into her car. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, and the tears she had been holding back for so long finally began to fall. With no destination in mind, Emily drove aimlessly through the city, lost in her thoughts. The world around her seemed to carry on as usual, but she was stuck, paralyzed by her own suffering. Every corner she turned, every place she passed, brought back memories of her and Mike. Places where they had laughed, dreamed, and planned their future. Now, all of it felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else, to another life. She eventually parked in an empty lot at a secluded park, far from anyone, and collapsed. She cried harder than she had ever cried before, letting out the weight of all the pain she had been carrying since that fateful day at the church. Her chest ached as if her heart had shattered into 1,000 pieces, and she didn't know if she could ever put it back together. "Why me? Why did this happen to me?" she screamed, though no one was there to hear her. She felt utterly alone in the world, abandoned by everything and everyone. Emily had always been strong. She had always believed she could face anything, but now, in that moment, she felt weak, broken, powerless. The pain of betrayal and humiliation was more than she could bear. Between sobs, she looked down at the engagement ring she still wore. For weeks, she hadn't had the courage to take it off. It was as if, by keeping it on, she could somehow deny the reality of what had happened. But now, as she stared at the ring on her finger, all she felt was anger. Anger at Mike for destroying everything. Anger at herself for believing in him. And most of all, anger at having allowed her life to reach this point. With a sudden, violent motion, she yanked the ring off her finger and hurled it out the car window. The ring disappeared into the tall grass, vanishing instantly. But instead of feeling relief, Emily felt even emptier. It was as if that small object had been the last remaining piece of who she used to be. Sitting alone in that desolate park, Emily realized just how much she had lost. It wasn't just Mike. She had lost herself, her confidence, her self-worth, her will to move forward. Everything had disintegrated the moment he decided not to show up at the altar. For hours, she sat there, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of how her life had come to this, but no answers came. The only thing she knew was that she couldn't keep going like this. Something needed to change, but at that moment, she didn't know what. She didn't know how. "I'm not the same person anymore," she whispered to herself. "I don't even know who I am now." As the sun began to set, Emily finally started her car again and drove home. But unlike before, there was no plan. There was no idea of how to get past this. She was completely lost, drifting in the chaos her life had become. That night, in the darkness, Emily had hit rock bottom. She had reached the lowest emotional point of her life, and she had no idea if she would ever be able to rise again. The days following Emily's darkest moment were long and lonely. She could barely think of anything but the failure and pain she carried. Every attempt to move forward felt like a futile effort. Emily felt trapped in a cycle of despair, unable to see a way out. She had lost so much: Mike, her wedding, her confidence, and now she couldn't find the strength to get back up. One evening, after an especially difficult day, Emily sat in the quiet of her small apartment, overwhelmed by the silence. The memories continued to haunt her, and the tears came, unstoppable. She cried harder than she ever had, feeling the unbearable weight of everything that had happened. Suddenly, as if her body had finally reached its limit, Emily found herself on her knees. Not knowing what else to do, she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She prayed. With a trembling voice and a heart full of pain, she began to pray intensely, opening her heart completely. "God, I don't know what to do," she whispered, the words barely escaping between sobs. "I can't get out of this hole. Everything in my life is shattered, and I feel so lost. I need your help. I don't know how to move forward on my own. Please show me a way. Show me a way out of this darkness." Emily wept as she prayed, feeling each word like she was surrendering all her despair into God's hands. She stayed kneeling there for a long time, too exhausted to stand, letting the tears flow freely. And for the first time, she felt as if someone was listening. That night, after her prayer, Emily fell into a deep sleep, exhausted from crying. When she woke up the next morning, the sun shone brightly through her curtains. She felt a little lighter, as if some of the pain had eased. Soon after she finished her morning coffee, the doorbell rang. Confused, she walked to the door and found a delivery man holding a large, elegant envelope. "For you, Miss Emily," he said, handing over the package before quickly departing. She held the envelope for a moment, unsure of what it could be. When she finally opened it, she found a letter from a law firm. The letter informed her that a distant aunt, someone Emily barely knew, had recently passed away and left an inheritance to her. The surprise grew even more when she learned what the inheritance included: a house in a small coastal town and a significant sum of money. Emily could hardly believe it. It felt as though the path she had prayed for the night before was being revealed before her eyes. She was stunned. Why would her aunt, someone she had barely been in contact with, leave something so valuable to her? And why was this all happening now, exactly when she needed it most? Still hesitant, Emily decided to visit the house. She packed her car and drove to the small seaside town where the property was located. The drive was long, and as she traveled, her thoughts swung between the fear of leaving everything behind and the hope of finding a new version of herself in this unknown place. When she arrived at the house, Emily was speechless. The place was enchanting, with a breathtaking view of the ocean and a garden that looked like it belonged in a dream. The house was old but full of charm. It was as if it had been waiting for her, ready to offer the refuge she so desperately needed. As she explored the house, Emily found something that moved her deeply: a box of old letters hidden in a closet. The letters were from her aunt, written during a period of her life that Emily never imagined she had lived through. As she read each letter, Emily discovered that her aunt had also gone through a remarkably similar experience. She too had been betrayed by someone she loved, and instead of letting it destroy her, her aunt had used the pain as fuel to reinvent herself. Her aunt's words resonated deeply with Emily, as if each sentence was a direct answer to her prayer. Reading those letters, Emily felt an unexpected surge of hope. Her aunt's journey of healing and reinvention became a beacon for her own recovery. In the quiet of that coastal house, she realized she wasn't as alone as she had thought. There was a path forward, and though it wouldn't be easy, it was now clear. Emily closed the last letter and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of light in the darkness that had surrounded her for so long. She knew she could begin again. In the days that followed the discovery of her aunt's inheritance and letters, Emily began to feel more connected with herself than at any other time since being abandoned at the altar. The small seaside home provided the tranquility she so desperately needed, and the words of her aunt in those letters seemed to resonate deep within her soul. Each day was a step toward healing. Emily began to realize that her pain, though deep, did not define her. On the contrary, it was a testament to her strength. Every morning, as she gazed at the ocean, she felt a lightness in her heart that she hadn't felt in a long time. With the inheritance money, Emily decided it was time to pursue a dream she had buried years ago, opening her own small business. She had always wanted to run a boutique of handmade gifts, something that combined her passion for creativity and her desire to create a welcoming space for others. Now, with this opportunity in her hands, she knew this was her chance to rewrite her story. She worked tirelessly to transform the space into a reflection of her new life. The shop, located in the small coastal town, quickly attracted the attention of locals and tourists alike. People felt welcome there, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt she was doing something that truly mattered. The success of the store was a reflection of Emily's personal success. She learned to find strength in the small things: the sound of the waves, conversations with customers, and moments of silence in her new home. With each passing day, the wound Mike left behind began to heal. Not because she had forgotten him, but because she had finally found something greater than the pain, herself. Her aunt's story taught her that pain can be a catalyst for something greater. The betrayal Emily suffered didn't destroy her. Instead, it rebuilt her into someone stronger and more resilient. What once seemed like the end of her life, the abandonment by Mike, now marked the beginning of a new chapter. One evening, while closing her shop, Emily watched the sunset and reflected on how much she had changed. It wasn't just her external life, with her new business and surroundings, but inside as well. She was no longer the woman who knelt in tears, praying for a way forward. She was the woman who had found that way. One night, while sorting through some of the old belongings in her aunt's house, Emily found one last letter from her, seemingly saved for this very moment. The letter read, "If you're reading this, it means you found your strength. Life is not defined by what we lose, but by what we do with the opportunities we are given. Use what you've learned to help others, just as you've learned to help yourself." Those words stayed with Emily. She realized that her journey wasn't just about her own healing, but also about helping others find their strength in difficult times. She began organizing small workshops and talks in the town where she shared her story and encouraged other women to overcome their own struggles. Her shop became a space for healing and inspiration, a reflection of Emily's transformation. Now she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The pain she had once felt was the path to discovering her true strength, and she was determined to continue sharing that message, showing the world that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light waiting to be found.